As yet untitled.
Well, well, well. What have we here? If it isn't the mighty Ruth herself come to rescue her silly little Frenchman, ooh la la.
I am not a silly little Frenchman. I am Belgian. We Belgians, we are not at all like the French. We invented French fries, but they, of course, claim all the credits. Ah, c'est ridicule, et les Néerlandais,
Oh, be quiet! No, scratch that. Could you scream a little bit, maybe? In a mildly blood-curdling way. Oh, no, not like that. You're supposed to be terrified. I've just told you my wonderfully evil plan. Or rather, I would have, had Lydia not decided to start by writing the end of the book first. Still, it's a jolly good plan, I'm sure. It involves killing you and your petite amie here, and the rest of humanity, of course. Though, I can't quite work out why I should want to do that. After all, I do quite like to drink human's blood, and if they are all dead, I should have to drink cow's blood or something, and I don't really approve. After all, they can consent, and that's not very nice. Now,
come on! You're a rubbish villain. You're not supposed to care about things like that. I am sorry, Lydia, but I don't see how I can be expected to be all heroic when this is all I have to work with. I doubt he even knows what his evil plan is. I certainly don't.
Well, I like that. I can hardly be expected to tell you all the details. Otherwise, you'd see some fatal flaw with it and turn my own plan against me. That's what always happens in the films, If Lydia were more creative, she could find some way to reveal my plan to the reader without me having to give some ridiculously contrived exposition and revealing what I'm up to you. It's perfectly farcical.
I'd appreciate a little gratitude. After all, I did create you. Anyway, don't they say good characters are supposed to write themselves? Perhaps if you did a little bit more of the legwork, I could focus on addressing details like that.
Well, that's a self-contradictory argument if ever I heard one. You deserve gratitude because you think you created me, but I'm to write myself if I'm to be deemed a good character. And besides, who's to say you created me? I might well argue people are defined by their thoughts rather than the other way around. And in that case, I suppose I and the others are in some ways writing you. God help us. Yes, I think I'm right. Your suggestion that you created us would require you to have free will. And I have my suspicions about that.
You're not the only one.
You see, how do you set about performing an action? You have to think it first. I should like to move my leg, etc. But how then do we trigger a thought? Through another thought, perhaps? But that does rather create an infinite string of cause and effect with no clear beginning. Really then, you can decide to think something.
All right, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. In that case, Gerhardt, I'm not responsible for any of your actions, so you can stop complaining about my writing decisions. Or should those be your writing decisions, seeing how my thoughts write me?
Why Rousseau? I'd far rather be likened to one of our great Italian philosophers, like, philosophers, dictators, anyway, vastly superior to these half-witted French chappies.
I believe Rousseau was actually Swiss.
No! He was definitely Belgian, just as all the other great thinkers of the 16th century, and indeed any century.
I've clearly been watching way too much Star Trek recently. Anyway, it doesn't matter whether Rousseau was Belgian, he wasn't, or which philosopher you're most like. You can hardly expect me to know that. I read a Ladybird book on philosophers when I was 7, and I can't say I've given them much thought since. The point is that you need to cut me some slack. How am I supposed to write a half-decent plot when my own characters are conspiring against me? Gerhardt, could you please at least try to be a teensy bit menacing and maybe give us a few more details about your cunning plan. I'm not trying to revolutionize the genre, and frankly, I don't care if it's unrealistic for you to take the lid off your plans while they're still half-baked. I just need a book in which something actually happens. You could plan to plant possessed gnomes in the Houses of Parliament for all I care. Just please give me something to work with.
Very well. I plan to send possessed gnomes to the Houses of Parliament to assassinate the Prime Minister, and then I shall blow up the world with a giant, explosive rubber duck. Or maybe one of those garden flamingos would be more on theme.
He isn't taking this at all seriously, Lydia. It really is too much. I need a proper villain if I'm going to be all heroic. Frankly, I don't see that Xavier is in any real danger here. I might as well just go home and leave him to save himself for once. I think I'll go rescue someone else. I actually had a call a while ago. Something about some time travelers who've mislaid a dog.
Look here, it's hardly my fault. I don't recall ever asking to be the villain. It's frightful stereotyping making me the villain. That's what this is. You know who the real villains are?
Geese? I like most animals, but I have never held with geese. They always hiss at me when I walk by one, and once I was walking along, minding my own business, when...
No, not geese. I actually happen to be rather fond of them. They have such sweet little pointy teeth. No, humans. They're the true villain. I mean, just look at the state of the world.
I'd rather not. I gave up on the world years ago. Why else do you think I became a writer?
Ah, I hadn't noticed you were one. You've never actually had anything published, have you? Don't take this the wrong way, Lydia, but you're hardly very good at this novel writing malarkey.
He's right, you know. When have you ever written anything that's even remotely worth reading? You took the last book you wrote to 58 publishers, all of whom promptly rejected it. I'd give up if I were you. Well, I suppose I am you. Sort of.
Oh God, not you. What are you doing here?
Well, I am your subconscious, Lydia. I'm not exactly sure where else you'd expect to find me than in the deepest recesses of your delusional mind.
Is this really happening right now? I've already had it up to my neck with this lot, and you, me, we have to butt in and make this 10 times more unbearable than it already was?
Shall I brew some tea and we can all have a nice little cat and talk things over?
Ooh, I like cats.
Did you realise I don't have a physical form in here? I don't think I could drink tea with you. Anyway, aren't you Belgian?
Oui, bien sûr. But why?
I mean, never mind.
You do, of course, realise the lunacy of the implication that only British people drink tea, dear Lydia. There's only one tea plantation in the entirety of the United Kingdom, and even that is a relatively modern development. Many other nations have a far richer tea history than we do.
Exactement. In Belgium, we have a very rich tea history. In fact, tea was invented there.
I don't believe you can invent a plant, Xavier.
Well, in that case, we were the first to consume it as an heated beverage.
I don't believe that's true either.
It doesn't matter either way. The problem is I'm getting absolutely nowhere writing this accursed book, and to top it all off, I'm now seemingly embroiled in some petty argument with my own subconscious for no good reason that I can see.
I do wish you'd refrain from talking about me as if I wasn't here. It's terribly impolite. I've merely come to assist with this accursed book of yours. I'm certain I could do a far better job than you.
Oh, so you're here to help now, are you? A minute ago, you were telling me how I was an utter failure when it came to writing, and I might as well lay down my pen and give up. At least pick a position and stick to it if you insist on interfering and tormenting me so.
Tormenting is a little harsh, don't you think? You might show a little gratitude for the help I'm about to provide. I have a creative mind. Or half of one. A creative half of a mind that is not half a creative mind. Your half's useless.
Well, it's not like you've ever written a book. I don't think you're in any position to lecture me about my lack of creative talent.
I've never written a book, no, but who do you think writes your dreams? And you do enjoy them, don't you? They're cinematic marvels, far more interesting than any of those god-awful rom-coms you frequent. I could give you inspiration. After all, my imagination is far more vivid than yours. Here, I'll show you how to make this little story a bit less dreadful. Starting with your characters, they're a little... quiet.
Hey!
This subconscious of yours is even worse than you, Lydia. I don't like her attitude one jot.
I can't say I'm awfully fond of her either, Gerhardt, but I reckon we're stuck with her.
It's all very well for you. You created her. You've only yourself to blame.
I'm not sure anyone gets to pick their subconscious. You're being a little harsh.
Thank you, Ruth. Anyway, Gerhardt, I can't be the one to blame for her. My thoughts write me. Or had you forgotten?
Well, of all the miserable blight... Oh dear. I appear to have turned into a rabbit. I'm not sure I like this very much. My teeth, they're blunt. This is awful. Change me back. Or can't I at least be a goose?
Afraid not. Besides, I think it rather suits you. Such fluffy ears.
But I don't want to be a rabbit, Gromit.
Gromit? Who's Gromit?
What do you mean, who's Gromit? Only the most famous pluses in Dog Alive, you uncultured swine.
Oh no, I'm not a pig. I believe, in actual fact, I've been turned into a tapir.
Well, if you insist on forcibly lagomorphosizing me, you could at least do the decent thing and make Xavier Dutch. Then he'd be sorry.
What is your quarrel with the Dutch, Xavier? You do drone on about it rather, but I can't say I've ever found much logic in your arguments.
Well, it's just that they're so... Dutch, isn't it?
Lydia Zwei, please.
I don't take too kindly to that name, Gerhardt. Besides, I've a much better idea.
Echt? Moet je zo zijn?
No! Ruth, what have you done to her?
Xavier, is het echt zo awful? You can not even overcome your voordeel against the Dutch? Not even for me?
She could turn you into a bear for all I care, but Dutch really is too much. The Dutch are the natural enemy of us Belgians.
Is that so?
Well, admittedly I didn't do all that much research, but Wikipedia said...
Well, if Wikipedia said, Gerhardt, I grant you your wish.
You wouldn't dare. Oh, you have. Oh, mon Dieu. Quelle horreur! Quel désastre!
Oh, he is rather melodramatic, isn't he? It's such a ridiculous thing to get het up about. He is fine with being turned into a tapir, but Dutch? Oh no. Quelle horreur.
Gerhardt, soyez prudent.
Oh, do turn them back. This is getting ridiculous. We'll never get anywhere at this rate.
Well, if you insist, I'll let you have your boring old characters back.
Well, thank goodness for that.
Don't say I didn't warn you when your novel gets ditched by another 58 publishers.
Thank you for that helpful contribution. I would say I wouldn't know what to do without you. But I would. I'd be having a party to celebrate finally ridding myself of your interfering presence. You're always lecturing me about my writing, but it's not as if you would be a good writer. You don't have the commitment. You're always swanning off and abandoning me to concentrate on the actual complexities of novel writing. Don't you remember the one and only time I let you help on a book? It was that children's story about a zebra's head on a spring. The would-be publishers, or would have been if it wasn't so disturbing, described it as the stuff of nightmares. And I haven't been allowed to stay at my sister's house since I showed the illustrations to my 3-year-old niece.
Well, it isn't my fault they can't appreciate the originality of the character design. I personally found Hildebrand a charming and resourceful character. Oh, look! He's just coming over! Speak of the devil.
What? Why?
Come now, you brought him up first. And he's not alone.
Is that a dolphin?
Why is the dolphin carrying a chainsaw?
Oh, not Chainsaw Dolphin 2.
Lydia, I knew you must have a strange mind. I've lived in it long enough to realize that, but honestly, what were you thinking when creating that pair of monstrosities? They're more horrific than anything I've ever seen in my life! Which theoretically spans 573 years, but feels suspiciously like 6 months.
It would have been quite sweet had the zebra have been made of fiberglass, perhaps. But, well, and the dolphin...
It's her you should blame for that.
We can't form ideas independently of each other, you know. You're as much to blame as I am. Ah well, here they are now.
Heard you were having a spot of bother with this new book you're working on. We were, it has to be said, mortally offended by your decision to scrap our story. It was nothing a bit of redrafting couldn't have fixed. But, being as we are infinitely helpful creatures, we've decided to offer our halfpenny worth. Isn't that so, Jeremy?
Jeremy?
'Tis I, Jeremy, formerly known simply as Chainsaw Dolphin. Without a name, my life was devoid of meaning. I was merely a caricature, an archetype of evil. Now, thanks to my newfound friend Hildebrand, I have found a name which was so cruelly denied to me by my soulless, heartless author.
Oh, come on.
Hildebrand and I sought high and low through the deepest regions of Lydia's mind, sifting through her thoughts and memories for the perfect moniker. I tried out Lysander, Hercules, even Agamemnon. None of them suited me. And then we happened upon Jeremy, an unassuming name for a dolphin whose sole quest in life is to pass by unnoticed, not scorned as the villain I never signed up to be. Now I put my chainsaw to better use, carving sculptures of olive trees.
Sculptures of olive trees. Does anyone buy them?
Oh, I don't sell them. They are merely an expression of my artistic spirit, suppressed for so long by my creator, who sought to see me confined to the role of a malevolent marine creature.
Aha! You see, I identify strongly with your experiences. I too have been cast in the role of a villain against my will. I wouldn't mind if only I had a cause I could really get behind. But it seems I am to act as the villain merely to create an obstacle for the hero's quest. You see, Lydia, this is how you make your characters feel. I have found a kindred spirit in you, Jeremy. Oh, how rude of me. I've forgotten to introduce myself. My name is Gerard, and these are Ruth and Xavier.
Pleasure to meet you. Perhaps you'd like to hear a little more about my sculptures?
Well,
They are a form of topiary. I topiary them from olive trees.
It's as pointless as it sounds. He just prunes the odd branch and declares his created a masterpiece. It hardly looks any different.
Well, I must admit, it does sound a little unusual.
Well, if by unusual you mean highly innovative and original, you'd be right. Hildebrand here simply fails to appreciate the profound symbolism of my work. She doesn't see how sculpting a tree into an idealized version of itself satirizes society's obsession with perfection and the vilification of anything deemed Arthur.
He's more pretentious than you might imagine a chainsaw-wielding dolphin to be.
He is as mad as a box of Frenchmen.
I'm rather inclined to agree with you there, but seeing as he does carry a chainsaw, I'd be a little less vocal in your criticism.
Oh, he's perfectly harmless, really. He might bore you to death, but certainly not with heavy machinery.
Thank you, Hildebrand. Although I do take offense at being labelled boring, I'm hardly to blame if others are simply unable to see my vision. He is right, however, in that I am no villain. I wouldn't hurt the proverbial fly. I've no call to, really. They're not very appetizing. I much prefer fish, especially flounder. Yes. They're quite a delicacy, with a bit lemon juice.
Jeremy.
Oh yes, the point is, you've gotten absolutely nowhere with this novel of yours. You've always sought literary renown and all that claptrap, but you're pretty far off achieving it, if I may say. You've pondered over various storylines and characters for months, hoping to come up with that magic formula, and then you produce this lot.
Here we go again. Really, Mr. Dolphin, I think that's a little rude. We're rather a good set of characters.
I mean, no offense to either yourself or your friends here, but I have to dispute that. That isn't to say I don't like you, Ruth. I do like you. I happen to think you're rather sweet. But my point is, you're rather ill-defined.
What do you mean? I'm strong and brave and ruthless.
Ruthless, because his name is Ruth. Get it? Sorry.
I fear Jeremy's right, Ruth. I'm afraid almost every goodie ticks those boxes. James Bond, Lara Croft, Graham Garden.
Yes, quite. And as for the others, well, I'm afraid they are no better. Xavier, you're rather passive. You just sit around and wait to be rescued. Well, so does every other victim in books. It gets rather dull after a while. But, as a pair of villains, you two would be far more interesting. Don't you think, Lydia?
I can certainly see them as villains, the amount of hassle they put me through.
And you, Gerhard, you're the least frightening villain I've ever met. Now, I don't blame you for it one bit. You're clearly not enjoying it. As you say, though, perhaps you'd do a better job if you had a cause you could really get behind. Now, I have a plan.
Shh! We'll go on, Jeremy. Let's hear what you have to say.
Lydia, you said yourself you see Ruth, Xavier, and Gerhard as obstacles to your writing process. So if you were the hero in a story, they would be the villains, blocking you in your quest to write a book that might actually be unbad enough to get published.
Bad?
Well, I do think good is a tad overambitious. Better not to aim too high, or you might be disappointed.
Even unbad seems a pretty high target for a book she's writing.
I thought I got rid of you. Must you keep popping up at inopportune moments just to make me feel even worse about myself than I already do?
I think that's pretty much my job description. They do say you're your own worst enemy after all.
As I was saying, Ruth, Xavier, Gerhard, and your subconscious are the villains in your story.
I'm not sure I like being labelled a villain.
Huh. That's rich coming from you. I seem to recall you were unmoved by my plight.
It isn't always a bad thing to be a villain. In fact, it's merely a matter of perspective.
Yes, that's quite true. If Professor Moriarty were the main character in Sherlock Holmes, then...
It wouldn't be called Sherlock Holmes.
Then the eponymous character would be the villain.
The point is, you already have a perfectly serviceable story staring you in the face, Lydia. Why not write the tale of an author blighted at every turn by a cast of uncooperative characters who simply refused to fit the mold into which they were cast? It would take no effort at all, seeing as it's simply a depiction of reality. Or whatever this is, and I've never read a book quite like it. It's unique.
Don't you think it's a bit Meta. Mine people brand it clever.
It isn't clever. Just clever. And let's face it, you don't have any better ideas.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I have a couple of ideas in the back of my head.
She doesn't.
Well, what do you all think?
I suppose it might be fun being a villain for a change. It'd be much more interesting than having to rescue people all the time. It really does get quite tiresome after a while. Xavier, you know, I don't enjoy rescuing you. It's a pretty thankless task and... I just don't... I've realised I don't like you all that much. It's not that you're a bad person or anything, but I feel like we're only really together because that's how our story was written.
Ruth?
Xavier, everything that's happened over the past, however long it's been, has shown me that everything I thought my world was just a construction. I'm only a force of good, whatever good even is, because that's what Lydia decided for me. And I feel the same way about us, Xavier. And I think you do too, really, at heart. When Lydia Fry made me Dutch.
Je suis désolé. I'm not sure there's anything I can do. It's how I was created. It's part of who I am.
We needn't any of us be bound by who we were supposed to be. Just look at Gerhard. Or Jeremy.
They are brave, Ruth, and I am not. There's a reason it is always you who has to save me.
Yes, I suppose you're right. Perhaps one day.
Peut-être.
We'll still be friends, though.
Ouais.
Does anyone have tissues?
I'm afraid this is probably my fault. Do you two need a moment to talk things through?
No. We'll manage. I know you didn't mean for this to happen, Lydia. Now, what were we talking about before?
We were discussing how you'd feel about being the villains of the piece.
I suppose it could be interesting. It couldn't be any less interesting than being imprisoned and forced to listen to Gerhard complaining about how awful it is to be forced into felony.
It is awful, Xavier, and I'd hardly say I was complaining. Anyway, much as I do rather like the idea, I do see a slight flaw.
You do?
If the plot entails us refusing to cooperate, then by failing to do as Lydia would like, we would be cooperating, and that does rather create a paradox. It would only work if there was some sort of funny plot that we could refuse to play our roles in. Of course, none of us were awfully keen on the original plot, and we did, I'll admit, stray from the script. But the issue with that is that, well, we were so uncooperative that we never even got past the first scene. It won't be a very long book at this rate.
He's not wrong there.
I have an idea.
Makes a change.
Perhaps we could begin with a scene in which you declare how awful the story is. We've already got that down pretty well. Instead of me, you'd be arguing with the theoretical author of the book within the book, though she'd essentially be a self-insert for me. Then you could start acting out your own plot. Whatever you'd rather do than taking over or saving the world. This would make up the book within the book. Once your plot had unravelled, there could be a little scene in which the fictional author was interviewed by a journalist about the success or the failure of a book to tie everything up at the end. Was any part of that somewhat comprehensible?
Vaguely. So we can pick our own plot. We have free reign.
Yes. Anything you fancy.
In that case, I think I should like to open a patisserie. Perhaps Xavier and Ruth could be industrial spies if they'd like. Trying to steal my secret recipe for vampire cheesecake.
I wouldn't mind that, as long as I get some cake out of it.
Will you sell Belgian waffles?
If you'd like.
Well, in that case, I'm in.
Good. I'll get writing and we'll see what we can come up with. Thank you, Jeremy, Hildebrand. I'll admit I was sceptical when you first appeared offering your services, but between us, we've come up with a halfway reasonable idea.
Jeremy and Gerhard came up with the idea. You have very little to do with it, Lydia, my dear.
Do you mind? You're constantly putting me down, even when I finally begin to get somewhere. I'm grateful to all of my characters for helping, but at the end of the day, they're all part of my imagination. So this is my success as much as theirs.
You're quite right there, Lydia. You've done well. Hildebrand and I were only too pleased to offer our services. We simply helped you discover your creative spark. Now, go forth and write.
And now for something completely different. Our literary correspondent, Tina Hayworth, is with Lydia de Montfort Christie, author of the experimental novel Death of the Author.
That's right, Jim. Lydia, critics are describing your book as unusual. I'm afraid to say I've even heard it called clever. What is your response to that?
Well, it isn't news to me that the book's reception has been divided. It is a pioneering new take on literature. Of course, for some, it's too unusual, but as far as I'm concerned, that needn't be a negative. Unusual is simply a byword for original and innovative, and it isn't clever, just clever.
Are you not at all perturbed by the negative comments concerning your book?
No. This is the first novel I've ever had published. That in itself is a massive achievement. My publishers have confidence in the novel, and so do I. It doesn't matter to me if a few naysayers label it clever or what have you. I am proud of my book. Writing it wasn't easy. I faced several obstacles and felt like throwing in the towel more times than I can count. But now it's done. I can look back and see how much I've learnt about myself. The book's made me happy. And even if only a few people get it, then it was worth it. I've achieved my personal goal.
Thank you, Mr. Montfort Christie. And now, back to Jim in the studio.
Thank you, Tina. Well, I'm afraid that was all we have time for, but don't go anywhere. After the break, we'll be back with extreme gerbil wrestling. But for now, I bid you good night.
Gerbil wrestling. Isn't that a tad strange?
No, just highly original and innovative.
I see. Cruel, though.
Of course. The world is.
That's why I became a writer.
To escape from it all?
That too. But I was going to say to create a better one. Have you ever got lost in a fictional world?
I have a feeling I'm in one right now.